kidneys always bruised, the daddy's girl that became you. In the front seat, you pulled me close, kissed my lips, it tasted like home. Flashes of crosswords and chamomile, the years pass like a Ferris wheel. Tiny fractures in the form, the days we live so much more. Got a little place near the beach, we watch the sailboats out at sea. And we ride along the Palisades, love is just a summer day. If you hold too tight, it starts to fade. Let it go, then it floats away. In time, will you remember me? For a second, we had everything.
New setup, guys. Hello. I'm trying to figure out how to I forgot to change that. I'm trying to figure out how to interact with my things on my desk because I have a camera right here. I knew I forgot to do something. Nothing can ever just be perfect on the one go, you know? Yeah, thank you for helping me stress test. God knows I need it. Alright, that should be okay for now. Oh, look, it's that game. It is that game. Guys, I painted my nails for you. I did that for you. They look like shit in person. But it's fine. Don't worry, Bashman, we'll play Kids on Bikes. Don't worry. Hi, guys. Welcome on in. This is my new little segment that I decided. Do you like my overlay? I spent 20 minutes working on it today. 20 whole minutes. This is my new segment that we're doing on the channel where I am going to finally put to good use all of the various TTRPGs that have been collecting dust on my shelves and actually gonna just, use them for things. So, okay. I don't think that's necessary, but 80s vibes, yeah. I found I'd made like the promo and I was like, I just want like neon vibes. So my coffee is still very hot. I also don't have any Biscoffs to enjoy my coffee with, which is terrible. Awful. I think I might actually, if I continue to do this, I might actually get a better camera too for the actual top down, because I know that this camera is not super great, but it is the dog cam that I did use at one point when Macy actually laid in her bed. I need to work on my overlays, but yeah, squirrel. Listen, I love this. You need some help with overlays. I love working on an overlay. But we're going to be talking about Kids on Bikes, 2nd edition. Obviously, I have the paperback. That's a little look through of it right now. As always, the Kids on Bikes stuff has really cute... Wow. Hi, City! The Kids on Bikes has really cute artwork. And this is kind of all throughout. It reminds me of... It kind of reminds me of... kind of like Teen Titans, but not Teen Titan Go. Kind of those old books that you used to get in your elementary school, like the mystery books. What is that? It starts with a W, like Wayside or something like that. It reminds me of that art. Yeah, the real Teen Titans, not the fake Teen Titan Go bullshit. Yeah, like old school comics as well. But yeah, let's get into it. So this is Kids on Bikes, 2nd edition. I believe it's from the publishers are Hunter Entertainment. I think Renegade also publishes this, but it is by Jonathan Gilmour and Doug Lewandowski. This is the 2nd edition of the book. I do not know enough about the 1st edition to know what changes have been made. But I'm looking forward to learning this edition since it is the one that I have a physical copy of. Or like the art. Yes, it's Hardy Boy. Yeah, that's exactly it. So it's a pretty solid made book. The pages feel really nice. And sometimes I don't like when pages have that glossy feel because I don't like the slippiness of pages. So this feels like actual real paper. Got a good grip on them, which is important to me as someone who gets sensory overload with certain textures. But let's read through the back. Kids on Bikes 2nd edition is the updated version of the award-winning collaborative world-building RPG set in small towns with big mysteries. Written and created by celebrated game designers Jonathan Gilmour, Dead of Winter, Dinosaur Island, and Collab, and Doug Lewandowski, Home, Duel of Wands, Kids on Bikes is a rules-light storytelling system that gets players into the action first. Your adventures take place in small towns at any point in history before anyone could catch video of a ghost using their camera phone, use GPS to track a suspected homicidal maniac roaming around town, research an old creaky house in seconds using the internet. Kids on Bikes takes place in a more mysterious time where anything and everything could happen. Using a variety of stats such as grit, charm, fight, flight, brains, and brawn, you'll jump into the action. Each skill is represented by a polyhedral die based on your character's competence. More sides equals better chance of success. Gameplay is fast-paced and fun. The only limit is your imagination. Which I think that's a pretty good overview. I did play the 1st edition. I ran a 1st edition game, albeit this is a rules light system, but I ran it very, very rules light. But I think that is a very good overview of what I know the system to be. You get your stats. You assign a dice to the stat. So you assign between a D4 and a D20 to that stat. And that is the dice that you will roll for that stat when you're trying to do an ability check. Yeah, let's look. I'm gonna do something. I'm gonna fold. I know that kind of gets people sometimes, but I gotta fold. Yeah, D20 for the Riz. Again, very nice inside. We have the art credits here. Table of contents. So we have Chapter 1, Getting Ready to Ride Together. Chapter 2, World Building. Chapter 3, Character Creation. Chapter 4, Playing the Game. Chapter 5, Powered Characters. Chapter 6, Bike Maintenance. Chapter 7, Information for the GM. And The Horror in the House of Hook Hill, which I believe is a sort of introductory adventure that you can run. What font is that? I don't know. I kind of like it, though. It's very much in the spirit of the game. So I'm going to do something like, it is a Goosebumps looking font. I was going to just fold it, but maybe I shouldn't do that. I treat my books like pieces of shit, but I do it lovingly. So let's read this little kind of prologue. The halls of the school are nearly silent. You try to keep your steps as small and controlled as possible. As you grip your flashlights tightly, the only noise you hear is the hum of circulating heat. Instinctively, you hold your breath as you approach an intersection. You don't know if you're alone in the building. With your backs pressed against the lockers closest to the intersection, you wait. Listen. You think you hear breathing around the corner, but maybe it's your mind playing tricks on you. You hope it is. In Kids on Bikes, you and your friends will play everyday people encountering strange, scary, and otherworldly forces that you can't comprehend, much less overpower. Working with, not against, the GM, you'll collaborate to tell your story. But in order to survive them, your characters will need to work together, use their strengths, and know when they have to run and hide. Yeah, you saw The Temptation. I have books of 20 years and the spine still... No, I be cracking those spines, baby. It's a modified version of the Dreadful font, if I recall. Yeah, I could see that. It's nice. It's distinctive, which is important. You want your, you want that font to be distinctive. I come and then I go. Hello, Calamity. Thank you for lurking, mortal. Just doing like a very brief flip through. So I have a wide variety of TTRPG books, and this is not quite bare bones when it comes to like the overall layout, but definitely does not have a lot of frills. They have some pictures to just line pages, but there's not a whole lot of extra tidbits on the pages, which makes it quite easy to read through and follow through. Sometimes, and the first one that comes to mind is Morkborg. Morkborg is a lot to look at when you're just reading through the game itself. And as someone who gets very easily distracted or who just has a hard time sometimes just like sticking with stuff, Morkborg is very hard for me to like read through. Luckily, they do have a like a no frills version, a plain text version of the rules, so that's nice. But yeah, I like that this is very easy to read. It's still nice. It's still a nice book. The font is a decent size. It's not too small. They have literally just pages and pages of stuff without any sort of interrupters in the terms of pictures. But I appreciate a well-made and simple layout a lot of the time when it comes to TTRPGs. Can I get a moped? No. I mean, you can if you want. I'm not your fucking mom. Makeup's... Oh, thanks. I do have paid actors. I know they're a little small, but I have paid actors in. I did that for you, Cynthia. I thought of you. I can play... listen. So you can have a moped, but it's one of those like really shitty ones that like you give to like a child. That goes like maybe 10 miles an hour. Uphill about 5. You kind of gotta like lean with it to get it uphill. For reals, you had to take our shot of rum. We all rolled like shit and got trashed. Hell yeah. That sounds fun. Okay, let's see. We are going to read through part of this. We're not going to read through all of it just because it is a lot. I think that we're probably going to cover this week and then the next in 2 weeks. But let's see. Getting ready to ride together. In a world of unspeakable horrors, working together is the only way forward in Kids on Bikes. People come together to solve terrifying mysteries and stop the unknown from entering our world, and as players and facilitators, we come together to tell these stories. This chapter is about setting up an out-of-game experience that creates an incredible in-game experience. Here you'll find everything you'll need to know about playing Kids on Bikes before you roll up a character or create the first monster. Okay. So this talks about hosting a session 0. Hosting a session before you jump into fully playing the game, often called session 0, is a good way to go through everything you need to. Think about it like checking your bikes out before a long ride. Skip a step with your bikes and you're liable to have a chain pop or off or realize that you forgot to bring snacks. Some groups will run this session 0 online before meeting up, either with a video or audio chat, blah, 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 blah. You can't do a session 0 because you're running a one-shot and have made pre-generated characters heavily rely on your road signals, and your content warnings still go through a checklist below, as they'll still need all of this information. So we have a little bit of a... I'm doing it. I'm just going to do it. We have a little bit of a session 0 checklist, which is important for most TTRPGs. Even if you are doing a one-shot, it is nice to have a little session 0 if you're not super familiar with everyone in the group, or if everyone's not familiar with each other as a GM or as a player. And it's good to just kind of have a baseline and kind of start to build that rapport, like, outside of game. Okay, you can have a Razor scooter. I'll allow it. I saw a Razor scooter torture contraption on TikTok today. It's like a toy car where you gotta wheel it backwards to coil the spring and then it'll go forward. The nice thing about this series of TTRPGs, Kids on Bikes, Brooms, Teens in Space, is the story is king. Hunter's Entertainment is great about safety tools and setting up a... Yes. Yes, definitely. So here are just the little things, and your session 0 is going to be different, depending on what type of game you're running, depending on the group that you have, and everyone, you know, no one's saying you have to include all of these things, but including them is nice just so you're setting player expectation as well. So we have introduction. If you don't already know everyone you're playing with, take time to introduce yourselves. Give them the name you want to be called and your pronouns, and make sure you know that it's the same for everyone at the table. Tone. The GM will facilitate a discussion about the tone of the game. Content and consent checklist. The GM will remind everyone of the possible content warnings for this game and will go over the results from the pre-game form so that you know what is and isn't on the table for the group, which is very important. Hi, Claude. Claude, I missed you at PAX West. I saw you were there, and I was on the lookout for you. I'm not gonna lie. So content and consent checklist is pretty important for most people. I'm the type of person in a game where I don't really have a whole lot of lines. I have a very easy time separating reality from fiction. And I know that's not for everyone, and this is not to me saying that I'm better than anyone in any way for being able to do that, because I know it's just not possible for some people to do that. But for me, myself, and I don't really have a whole lot of lines and veils. There are some of the obvious ones that I just don't want to ever kind of have at a table, regardless of if I'm a GM or a player. But those usually are kind of, it goes without saying a lot of the times, and normally all of the other people at the table are in agreement. I only went Saturday was the worst day too. It was so crowded. I'm built different. I think I'm just built autistic is the problem. Marginalized groups and historical accuracy. Oh wait, hold on. Let's do content and consent checklist. The GM will remind oh wait, did I already read that? I already read that. Ha 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 ha. Never mind. Marginalized groups and quote-unquote historical accuracy. Similarly, when playing in an earlier time when many marginalized groups were even more marginalized, it's important to make sure that everyone is still able to have fun at the table. GM will make sure that your group addresses how to best handle that. So feel free to give your input about this, because I have played in a lot of quote-unquote historical settings. I don't feel the need to ever mention anything like racism or anything like that in the setting. I don't think that it's pertinent. I don't think that there's a place for it. Especially in like things based like on the real world. In a fantasy setting, like with you when you have sort of fantasy racism, like let's say Dragon Age with like elves, that's kind of whatever, because that's not an actual like human person. But yeah, I never sort of factor in like, oh, this marginalized group was treated this way during this time. If you are playing whatever type of character, you're not going to encounter any sort of historical racism. That seems weird. I love that TTRPG writers are giving guidance on this more. Yeah. I think it's important. It's important because we have, I think it's just like, it's a kind of like a duty and an obligation to come into the space if you're going to be taking up space in the community, and making sure that the community is welcoming to everyone, except for assholes and racists and bigots. It's not welcoming to them. But it's welcoming to everyone else. And we want to make sure everyone feels safe and comfortable in the community. And having these discussions is important in order to make sure everyone feels comfortable. And it also helps you as a player, if you're at a table and they start saying, hey, we're going to have this whole thing going on with like these weird subliminal racism things, you can be like, oh, no, this is not the table for me, actually, and this is really fucked up, and you guys need to rethink the way that you're doing this. I feel like if your player wants to enforce historical accuracy, then they just want an excuse to be bigoted. Yes, I 100% agree, Ad. Definitely agree. Characters' ages. When playing in a game with characters who aren't yet adults, it's important to keep some things in mind. The GM will make sure you're all on the same page about what this means for your game. So I know that there's a lot of people who, one of their lines is they don't want to ever see harm done to children. And when you're in a game where you're playing a child, that is something to take into consideration, because you can play on Kids on Bikes, you can play a child, a teen, or an adult. So that's something that you would want to kind of take into consideration about, hey, am I going to be making my players play children in this game, and are they going to be in mortal peril, and can this adversely affect the players actually playing the characters? Now, if it's something like your character not knowing how to broach a subject due to how they were raised, I get that. Yeah, I get it in like a fantasy setting, you know? Like where you're like, ugh, dead tiefling, oh. I heard you guys were the spawn of demons. I heard you guys like cult things and sacrificing lambs. Because that's like a fantasy race. But yeah, I don't think that it has any place in like, you're playing in a quote unquote real world. Heard y'all taste like cinnamon. Stop it. Stop it. Road signals. You go over these verbal tools and make sure everyone knows how to use them. Character romance and intimacy. The GM will facilitate a conversation about relationships and romance in the game. Everyone will share their expectations for their characters. This is another thing that's super important. Because I've been, as a GM, I do romance with my players, specifically Bones, because I know that Bones wants to have romance. So it's very important that you, as a GM, kind of figure out where your player's baseline is with that. Do they want a romance? Do they not want a romance? Are they open to it? But it has to be like, it has to make sense, and it has to be like sort of a natural progression. And I also think, again, like you have to consider the ages of the characters that you're playing and what level of romance is acceptable for a 12-year-old, a character who is 12. Ew, kissing, exactly. Super looking forward to getting my Kids in Capes game in. When did that like release yet, or is that still in production. I'd heard some stuff about that, and I think I remember thinking to myself, "Oh, Claude's gonna love that." But yeah, I think this is important. It's an important conversation to have, kind of at any table, but especially you kind of get into the weird minutia as a well, if you're playing children, what is appropriate? Town creation. As a group, you'll establish details about the town that your game will take place in. Character creation. Finally, you'll create both your characters and their relationships with each other by selecting tropes and answering questions. I agree, Sithy, though. I think that the ew kissing is the correct response to romance. Excuse me. Setting expectations and establishing tone. Kids on Bikes can emulate several aspects of the genre. It can be a game about literal kids on bikes investigating weird things while adults ignore them, about a family trying to find a missing loved one, or about members of a town working together to survive something sinister. It can involve high action, high investigation, high interpersonal drama, or any combination thereof. It's completely up to your group. Because of that flexibility, you'll need to work together to establish the kind of experience you want before the dice start rolling. What kind of game are you envisioning? What movie or television touchstones do you want to evoke? What sorts of characters do you want to play? Then, based on all what you want, you'll establish the game's tone. When discussing this, you're talking about an expectation of what will happen in the story and how you think your characters in the world should be portrayed. Setting the tone ahead of time will let everyone know that what kind of beats you're trying to hit, what kind of behavior is expected, and what they should be aiming for in terms of role-playing style. Again, I think that's very important. As someone who likes both really goofy things, I love a good goofy game, but I also really love the games where it's very serious. You have people who are trying to, like, characters are kind of getting pitted against each other, or you have like very high political intrigue. I really like those types of games. But there's nothing worse than going into a game thinking that it's going to be one thing and it's the other. I've had games like that where I have gone in expecting it to be one thing, and I had my character created, and I had the character in mind, and I was like, okay, she's going to be this very like stoic, no nonsense type of person. And then session 1 happened, and I'm like, oh, we got a hard pivot. We got a hard pivot right now, because that wasn't the type of game that was being run. And I think that if we had had that conversation prior, it would have been, I would have kind of came up with a different type of character. Instead, I kind of felt like I got shoehorned into something on the fly. And that's not to say that I couldn't have changed or retconned anything at any point, but it did feel very much like I was like, oh, let me just, okay, I gotta be this type of little goofy guy, goober now. All my players are looking for Murber. All Murber, all the time. I think that's another thing. Like, that's an important conversation to have with like your group as well. Bit of a side tangent. I think it's important that as a group, and this can be DM or GM facilitated, I think it's important going into a game that, hey, we're not going to murder hobo our way through this campaign. And I think that's a really important conversation to have, because sometimes you get stuck with like the one person in the game who wants to just murder hobo, and they'll just act without consulting anyone, and it ruins the game for everyone else. And I think that's important. If you have that one person at the table, maybe your table is not the correct one for them. So many horror stories of GMs who think they've got a brilliant twist, but it's just bait and switching the whole campaign. Oh, Claude. Oh, buddy. I have been in such a game. You have the GM who thinks that they're far too smart for the players, and instead of actually making any sort of progress in the storyline, the players just feel like they're being pulled about and strung about, desperate for any sort of thing that makes sense. Hey, Vlad. Oh, we fixed it. See? Now it's nice in the box. But yes, I have been in said such horror story. A serious game will have fewer comedic or goofy moments. A lighthearted game may rely heavily on comedy or unrealistic action. You don't have to call me out like that. I'm right. Not you, Bashman. Not you. You've not done that to me ever. And if you had, I would tell you, Bashman, you're not as smart as you think you are. Just put us on the storyline we need to be on. Thank you. Yeah, this is like right here. I think, and you also have to kind of set your expectation for like rule of cool. What are you like? What kind of like, because you are still playing a make-believe game. What sort of realism are you allowing for? Or do you want it to be fully realistic, or are you going to allow them, your players as a GM, are you going to allow your players to get funky with it? That's something that like I had, for All We've Lost, I had told my players, hey, rule of cool, if you pitch me something that might not be totally within the realm of realism given the world, but I think it's a really cool idea, I'll let you roll for it. It's not a guarantee, but I'll let you roll for it. Let's see. And then this talks about the consent form list. So anytime, for anything that you have, anything that a player has marked, you want to discuss that with the player. Ask them what, you want to kind of ask specifics to make sure that, hey, if it's mentioned, is that okay? Do we just want to completely avoid the subject altogether? That sort of thing, because communication is key. You want to communicate with your players. Players, you want to communicate with the GM as well as each other. That's what keeps the game going. In Lancer, it's setting expectations. That's so funny. And then once you've established that content, you'll discuss elements that you're excited to have in the game. Some of these might be content from the list, while others could be content that's not on there. Going around the table, and each player should share at least one element that you'd like to see in the game, or you may share as many as you'd like. I think that's important too, is and that's something I did with All We've Lost, is I kind of asked my players pretty much every session, or every couple of sessions, I do a little check-in with them and be like, hey, is there anything that you're looking to see? I think the first thing coming off the top of my head is Bones, I think, had asked for a heist episode. She wanted to do a heist. And I was like, okay, I can work that into the story. And so their goal for the second season was they were going to do this heist. And it was kind of this big lead up all through the second season of getting set up to do this heist. So I think it's important to ask your players that, not just in this particular TTRPG, but in any game, asking your players, hey, what would you like to see? Do you want to do more roleplay stuff? Do you want to do some combat? Do we want to do a little bit of dungeon diving for a little bit? Do we want to just do purely political intrigue for a little bit? Yeah. And then it says, updating the detour list. As you play the game, you'll encounter content that people hit the brakes on. When this happens, the GM will ask if you want it gone from the game forever or just for today, and will add anything removed permanently to the detour list. By the same token, as you're playing, players might realize some content they'd like to include in the game. When that happens, add it to the wish list for everyone to see easily. There isn't an exhaustive list of content warnings available, as triggers are unknowable and unpredictable. So that is also important. Just because someone says that they are okay with something prior to the game starting does not mean that during the game, if they will still feel that way when actually confronted with it. So just because someone said, yeah, I'm okay with that, and then you include it, and they're like, oh, wait, I'm not okay with that, that's fine. And no one should ever feel bad about kind of being like, oh, actually, this actually makes me uncomfortable. I would prefer not to have that. And you should be able to speak up and in the group. And if you don't want to do it in an actual group setting, I think that it's important for you to have some sort of messaging system set up between the players and the DM privately, so that if they don't feel comfortable speaking up in the group, 'cause a lot of times that can feel embarrassing. I think that you should have that sort of system in place. But here we have some of the possible content warnings. Pretty extensive list. Obviously, this is not the end-all be-all. And this goes into historical accuracy. Kids on Bikes is played in a historical time period. As part of your discussions during session 0, make sure to cover a few key aspects surrounding this. First, have a conversation about how accurate you want to make the historical details of the game. Chances are nobody wants to be at a table with someone who keeps saying things like, well, technically, our game takes place in the summer of 1993, so your character couldn't be obsessed with the X-Files. It hasn't been released yet. That's also important. You never want to have that person don't be that person at the table who's like, well, actually... Just shut up, it's make-believe. With those parameters, it's okay to be listening to Outkast's Aqua Mini in the summer of 1995, but you can't have downloaded it from Napster. Actually. Yeah, that's what they sound like. More seriously, ill-informed arguments about historical accuracy are often reasons that players and GMs push marginalized groups out of their games. Throughout these time periods, marginalized people existed, lived, and had vital roles in society. Decrying their inclusion as historically inaccurate shows a gross misunderstanding of life for marginalized people in history and is a harmful way to shut down a story. Playing in a historical setting is not an opportunity to perpetuate harmful behaviors of the past, many of which are still with us today. Even if there's a setting where certain ethnic groups weren't present historically, you can put them in. Their inclusion is more likely the paranormal events that occur in most Kids on Bikes game. There you have it. Treatment of marginalized groups. Systems of oppression throughout history have shifted over time, becoming more obvious in some ways, but also more insidious in others. During the discussion of the detour list, you've already addressed the extent of which you want to play into or avoid discussions of oppression in the game. If you decided to include it, now's the time to discuss how those systems of oppression will look. If, for example, you've decided to include discrimination based on sexuality in your game set in the 90s, will it look the way it did in the 90s with slurs and overt discrimination? Or will that discrimination be concealed, more in keeping with contemporary systems of oppression? Whatever you do while engaging with systems of oppression might not be the way your group wants to limit characters' choices. They should not negatively impact players' experiences. When making these decisions, make sure that you're valuing players' lived experiences over others' theoretical ones. So if you have someone at the table who is part of a marginalized group and they say, actually, this isn't cool, and you have someone who is not part of that group try to argue with them, you shut that argument down. Is basically how that goes. Then we have about characters' ages. One of the best parts of this game is the ability to play a variety of characters across different age groups. However, playing characters of all ages can complicate interactions between those differently aged characters. An adult hitting a child will always be child abuse. An adult sexualizing a teenager will always be abuse and pedophilia. Both of these are non-negotiably excluded from the game. It's important that you all pay attention to what's happening in the fiction around inter-character relationships. It's normal to have conflict between characters and for those moments to get heated. However, if an adult character physically prevents a child from going somewhere the child insists on trying to go, you're running the risk of veering into abuse. So that's also something to just be cautious of, is those sort of dynamics. I feel like if I were to run this game, I would not allow players to play different age ranges, because I feel like that sort of implicitly makes there's that weird power dynamic that just sort of will occur. And it's also something as the GM that you have to be aware about of your players' characters' relationships with NPCs. And that's something to be aware about, like, regardless of system and setting. But yeah. Road signals. Another feature that you'll see on every character sheet is a set of verbal cues to help navigate. Let's see. So there is one called break, which immediately stops play and calls for the scene to end. There is backpedal that allows the scene to rewind and be redone or go in a different direction than the group is heading. And I think that is a very important thing to have. This is all make-believe. This is pretend. Nothing is telling you that you can't go back and retcon something. Sometimes a scene does not play out the way that you want it to. Sometimes a scene gets out of hand. And it is up to the group to decide, hey, let's redo that. Because you can do that. It's make-believe. It's not set in stone. Even if it's on stream, even if it's recorded, if it's a home game, you can go back and say, actually, I don't really think that scene played out the way that it should have for XYZ reason. And you can just redo it. Pedal harder signals for the players and the GM that the direction the story is going is great and can even go further if it wanted. And then coast. signals that the current content is okay for the table, but it should not become more intense or be described in more detail. Check pressure asks about the content that you worry may push things too far. Rest stop calls for an in-game and out-of-game break for any reason. And then why rest stops? So to check in with the whole table, to check in with each other, and let's see if there's anything else. Engage in self-care. So I think, I don't know how some tables do it where they go for like hours and hours and hours, but as someone who has been a part of a lot of tables, especially a lot of RP heavy tables that sort of deal with a lot of really heavy and intense emotion, sometimes you just need that little break to step back and recollect yourself. So I think that taking breaks regularly should just be the norm. We take breaks usually like every hour and a half to 2 hours, just so everyone can get up, stretch. I check in with my players. Hey guys, how you doing? How are you feeling about this? They check in with each other, especially after like an intense scene. And that's very important because it helps you remember, hey, this person I am RPing across from is a person and they have feelings, and you want to make sure that you're never hurting anyone's feelings in roleplay as well. Like I said, I have an easy time separating it, but I know that sometimes feelings can get pretty intense. You can have a lot of bleed, which is a term I learned this weekend. You can have a lot of bleed sometimes, and it's not always a bad thing, but it can be a bad thing if you're letting an RP moment affect you negatively as a person, not just your character. So it's always important to have a nice little break. Romance and intimacy. Kids on Bikes characters of different ages may not be intimate with each other, obviously, either in gameplay or in characters' backstories. While it's okay for a younger character to think the older character is cute or have a small crush on them, it is a non-negotiable hard line that those feelings will never be reciprocated. Goes without saying, honestly. As you come together to tell a story through play, feelings between characters might develop, grow, or become romantic. This could mean cute crushes between kids, high school dating between teenagers, or deeper love and long-term partnerships between adults. Again, making sure that the romances are age appropriate. So within the little content guide, the consent form, they have a crush box. So if you're okay with having crushes, that is where you would check that. If you want to do date or partner, if you're okay with being physically intimate, you would check the 2 intimacy boxes, which is on-screen intimacy and then off-screen intimacy. Me, myself, and I do not really like on-screen intimacy. I'm okay with other people at the table doing that and engaging in that. However, I do like to be warned about it. I think it's important as well as to, just because it's 2 players engaging in intimacy, two characters engaging in intimacy at the table, does not mean that everyone else at the table has left. And I think it's also important to check in with everyone at the table to make sure that they're okay with witnessing such things. My idea of crush is totally different. I like to crush my opponents, hell yeah. Here's like my new desk map, by the way. I got it just for this. My other one had coffee stains all over it. Don't know how that happened. And then this says, if a player suggests that your character become intimate with their character and you don't want to, simply tell them that. If you would like to explain why not, you may. If you would prefer not to explain or discuss it further, you can simply say, that's not the story I'd like to tell. I think I'm going to implement that. Whenever someone comes to me and asks me to do something that I don't want to do, just in like daily life, that's not the story I want to tell. I think that's a good excuse. In every facet of life, that's not the story I want to tell. Using other tools, some groups who've played together many times before have an established norms and tools that they've all agreed upon and would prefer to use instead of the ones we've adapted for Kids on Bikes. We like having a pre-game form to establish detours ahead of time, but some groups would rather use the X card and address things as they come up. We like having specific in-game terms to give players language to communicate concisely, but some groups might prefer instead to use the terms they're familiar with. Again, it's your preference. What tools do you want to use, as long as you're using safety tools? Chapter 2, World Building. Kids on Bikes is usually set in a small town that at any point in history, before everyone could record videos with a cell phone in their pocket at all times. It is typically a place remote enough that the rest of the world doesn't care about it, but close enough that black helicopters can be there within an hour or two. Everyone in the town knows almost everyone else, for better and for worse. People look out for each other, and rumors travel fast. Let's see. During session 0, the GM will walk the players through crafting their town, their characters, and their relationships. Taking the time to do this in-depth creation is important, especially if you'll be playing many sessions. For shorter games or one-shots, the GM could create the town for you, leaving the players to focus only on their characters and relationships with other characters. Collaborative creation. Your decisions from earlier about the tone of the game will help you guide the decisions you'll make when creating the town. As with the rest of the game, there can be no wrong answers here. When building the world together, players take turns answering the following questions to create their own town, adapting the number of questions asked as indicated below so that each player is answering the same number of questions about the town. That's important too. If you're going to do something collaborative, you want to make sure that everyone has the equal amount of input. There's nothing worse than someone just coming in and just word vomiting, and then that is law. So you want to make sure everyone is getting an equal opportunity to contribute. So here are some of the questions our adventure takes place in. His industry our town is best known for is, our town is famous for, our town is infamous for, economically our town is blank, and one effect of that is blank. A notable local organization is, a notable landmark is, our school's mascot is, the town closest to us is named blank, and our relationship with that town is blank. After constructing the town, each of you shares one rumor about the town. Especially in a small town, rumors drive a lot of what goes on. These can be mundane or supernatural, big or small, personal or about the entire town, generally believed or completely fringe, anything you want. For example, the players agree that the adventure is going to take place in 1993. That's the year I was born. And be a fairly serious game. Carlos goes first and says they are in a town called Perkins, Colorado. Yasmin follows and says that the town is best known for mining. Brianna says that the town is famous for its candles, which has been made and sold to the world for years. Carlos then says that the town is infamous for a mining accident that trapped 12 miners underground 10 years ago. Yasmin decides the town is prospering as workers shift from mining to other more modern industries, but they decide not to define those industries or the consequences of that modernization quite yet. Brianna says that a notable local organization is the Elks, an organization that most of the adult men in the town belongs to. Do you guys have that? The Elks Club? Is that like a nationwide thing? Carlos says that one notable local landmark is the closed mine that no one... Carlos is really into this mine. That no one is allowed to go near. Yasmin adds that another notable landmark is the diving cliff, a place where teens often jump into the river that surges during the late spring thaw. Brianna rounds out the answers by saying that the high school's mascot is a mountain lion. They then decide that the town closest to them is Riverbelt, also in Colorado. The relationship between the two towns is historically good. While people generally live in the town where they work, visiting or shopping in the other town is common. As they move into rumors, Carlos says that he heard that the Elks is really a front for devil-worshipping cult. Yasmin says that she heard that Mrs. Worthy, the principal of the high school, is carrying on an affair with Mr. Yates, the principal of the elementary school. Finally, Brianna says that she heard that when they found the miners' bodies, they couldn't find 2 of them, and that the 10 they were recovered seemed to have been attacked by some sort of animal, not killed in the mine collapse. So that's a very neat way to build out a world. And then you can also do dice-based. If you're planning to play multiple sessions of Kids on Bikes, or if you want to focus on the town creation, you might decide to make a map of your town. Some players enjoy having a visual representation of where they are in the town, what's near that, and how long it might take to get them from roller skating rink to the creepy old house that has always just one light on inside. I've been in the military for 2 years at that point. It's okay, Siffy. It's okay. I'm still your dad. It's alright. We don't need to worry about the logistics of that. Oh, this is fun. To start, get a large piece of paper. Butcher paper or 6 pieces of printer paper taped together will work. Take a set of polyhedral dice and more dice if you'd like to add more features to your town, and toss them onto the paper. Use the location of the dice land and the face-up number to create locations of. That's fun. That's a fun thing to do. So you essentially take a piece of paper, you take some dice, and you take a couple of d20 and you roll them, and wherever they land on the paper is where those things, where the number on the table is going to be. I like that a lot. I was in 6th grade. I was just a baby. You guys would have been hanging out with a baby. How Shadow Dark builds towns and dungeons. Yeah, it's fun. It's a nice little system. Hi, Queecha. I like that. I like the randomness of it. I would have been your baby dad. Not to be confused with baby daddy. This is cool. We have old neighborhood, new neighborhood, cluster of businesses or strip mall, library, grocery store, church, lake or reservoir, park or playground, restaurant or diner, office park, train or bus station, vacant house, city dump, barbershop, ice cream store, bakery, airport, forest, monument, roller skating rink, or pool, office park. And that's not to say that these are the only things that you could add to your town. You could definitely add other things. But it's nice to have a little list to reference back to. And I think this also works if you're looking for, if you're trying to come up with a location. A nice little, we love a little table. The lower numbers might well come up more than once, but these are common locations that might appear multiple times. So that makes sense. They have the neighborhoods, malls, library, grocery store, church. Those are things that a town might have multiple of. After you've drawn these onto the map, add the following to the map: the town's schools, each character's house, any locations that you established in the collaborative town creation questions, like any sites relevant to important industries, the headquarters of notable local organizations, and any notable landmarks.
Oh, hey, you again.
Okay. I just ate 4 cheeseburgers and 2 bowls of mac and cheese. Please help me. That sounds like I don't think you need help, man. I think you're good. Folded. Yeah, I folded it. And the favorite part of most people, character creation. How are you doing, Kay? Huh. I don't know why I did that, as though my nails are long enough to break. They're not. They're nubs. Okay, the core of any RPG is the character you'll be embodying, your PC or player character. You and your GM will work together to create a character you'll be excited to play, one who can relate to in important ways, but who also allows you to escape the real world. There are parameters that you, as a player or GM, want the characters to have. Set them at the beginning of character creation. You might prefer all the characters to be in middle school or to have all shared an experience together. Make the world you'll be playing in exactly what you want it to be. Been so busy with both of my gigs and running my campaign. How are the streams? Streams have been good. We actually just got back yesterday. We took about a week off for PAX West. So Bones and I were running amok at PAX West over the weekend, and then just kind of dooting around Washington. Yeah, it's been good. How's your campaign going? I see your little pings and I go in and I read. I'm in that Discord lurking and stalking when you least expect it. Overview process. When creating your character, go through the following steps in this order. 1. Select a trope from the playbook and take the appropriate character sheet. 2. Make trope selections for your character. Age, strengths, a flaw, and the first name. 3. Introduce your character to the rest of the group. 4. Answer questions about your character's relationship with the other characters. 5. Select the finishing touches for your character. Motivations, a fear, obligations, knacks, what's in your backpack, a last name, trope-specific questions, and a bike. Selecting a trope. To streamline the character process, we've created a set of tropes that you can use at the start of the game to develop your character concept quickly. These tropes fall into categories such as conspiracy theorist, silver spoon, or brilliant mathlete. Selecting one trope will determine your character's stat dice and offer suggestions for choosing details about their personality and background. Choose the trope that you're most interested in playing. There's no right or wrong answers here. Your GM will work with you to make sure that whatever character you choose, you'll be central to the story of the game. If you don't find a trope that fits your sense of character, feel free to work with the GM to create your character from the ground up. This will take more time, but for players who already have a clear vision of who they want their character to be, or for players who don't want their character to fit into one trope or another, this might be the most satisfying way to create their character, which is nice. It's nice having options when it comes to character creation. There's nothing worse than having a character creator where it's like, hey, this is your character. You cannot choose anything else. This is the character that you're playing. Sorry, you don't get to choose your motivations or your fears. Sorry. It has actually been so fun. Been making a lot of strides with Foundry. I think the players are enjoying it too. We just had a big campaign moment. That's so exciting. I'm so glad you guys are having fun. I'm hoping that I'll be able to ping you at some point and be like, hey, I have a free Monday. I can hop in. Fingers crossed. And here are the character stats. So we have brains. This stat determines how book smart a character is. It will determine how well they understand problems, how well they did or are doing in school, and how quickly they're able to solve intellectual puzzles. Likely verbs: calculate, confuse, decode, learn, remember, solve, understand. And I believe the verbs are essentially if you are making a check. So what are you trying to do? Well, I'm trying to calculate something. Then you would use your brains stat. Yes. What is it? What is it? What? No. Joel wanted me to show you guys this. You don't know, Joel has a thing where he ritzes people. So, you all just got ritzed. What about Thinkgineer? Oh, I like that. Whenever you up for it, I can absolutely, hell yeah. I'll be thinking about a character. It's nice. I cannot tell you enough how nice it is to have like sort of that like not low effort, but just like low commitment of, hey, if you ever want to jump in. It's so nice. I appreciate that you even asked me to join in the first place. I can't believe you've done this. Who are you telling? Who are you going to tell? Jay? Brawn. This stat determines how much brute strength a character has. It does not determine how well they can fight, just how well they can lift things, and how athletic they are overall. It also determines how physically intimidating a character is. Likely verbs: bend, climb, carry, lift, hurl, swim, throw. Can't believe I got ritzed. I brought good dishonor to my ancestors. I'm sorry I ritzed you guys. That was deeply unkind of me. Fight. This stat determines how scary your character is, both in and out of a fight. They'll be able to learn to fight or to use weapons more easily. It also determines how intimidating a character is and how much it looks like they can handle themselves if things get physical. Likely verbs: intimidate, parry, punch, scare, shoot, threaten, wrestle. I want to go wrestling? Flight. This stat determines how fast a character is, as well as how skilled they are at evading their problems, literally, figuratively, or both. Characters with a high flight will be fast and tough to catch, both physically and verbally. Smooth talkers whose legs and mouths are quick. Likely verbs: avoid, dodge, strive, escape, evade, outrun, snatch. Snatch. Charm. Oop. That down there. This stat determines how socially adept a character is and how good they are at reading the emotions of another person or group of people. Characters with a high charm will be able to talk themselves out of tough situations and into good ones with relative ease, within reason. Likely verbs: convince, entice, flatter, lie, persuade, sweet talk, trick. The campaign should be something players can jump in and out of. No point in making it feel like a job. We're supposed to, yes, I hard agree on that. Obviously, I've made some commitments to games. I like to fulfill those commitments. But for like home games where it's just like rolling some dice together, I definitely agree. I think, you know, it sucks when someone comes to you and they're like, hey, I'm doing this game. I really want you to be a part of it. And you're like, oh, it kind of like doesn't really work. My schedule is super great. I'd only be available some of the time. But then they're like, yeah, that's fine. Jump in whenever. And you're like, okay. Thanks. Grit. This stat determines how hard it is to unsettle a character emotionally or physically. Characters with a high grit will be able to keep a level head in the worst of situations and will be able to keep their cool even when pushed hard. Finally, this stat also determines how street smart a character is. Likely verbs: brace, endure, refuse, resist, see through, struggle against, withstand. The higher a stat, the better a character is at skills involving that stat. So, essentially, you have between a D4 and a D20, and you are going to assign each of these abilities, these stats, you're going to assign one of the dice to that stat. So if you have a character who is very, very smart, if you have a mathlete who is very, very smart, then brains would get the D20, but let's say they're super socially awkward, then charm would get the D4. And then you would fill in, you would say, hey, they're pretty quick though, so the flight would get a D12, but they're a little scrawny, so brawn would get a D6. But even if they're scrawny, they still would fight pretty well. So that the fight would get a D10, and then they're kind of neutral, like they don't get super scared or anything, so that would get a D8. Speaking of TTRPGs, apparently the Stormlight Archive TTRPG I was talking about that's not surprising. People love Brandon Sanderson. Brandon Sanderson is a very popular author. That is actually not surprising to me. Even given the love of Avatar. Like, it became the most backed TTRPG ever on Kickstarter, which is insane. Good. I'm glad. I feel like I'm glad. Okay, here's my thing. Brandon Sanderson is probably one of the best world builders, one of the best magic system crafters, which are two things that a lot of TTRPGs are lacking, especially bigger named TTRPGs. The magic systems are often not super great. So I am glad that that was such a success, because I am very excited to play it. I think if there's any sort of like magic-based TTRPG that I would want to play, it would be one that Brandon Sanderson helped create in his worlds. He also pumps out multiple novels a year, which is yeah, dude's crazy. He's the opposite of George R.R. Martin. Crazy? I was crazy once. They locked me in a room. A rubber room. A rubber room with rats. Rats make me crazy. Characters' ages. George R. He's farting around. We're never gonna get the last two books. For many of the tropes, you'll need to pick your character's age, child, teen, or adult. The age of the characters has implications throughout the character creation process and during gameplay. So for children automatically receive quick healing strength, and they cannot take the rebellious strength. When rolling stat checks described in the stat check section, starting on page 46, children add +1 to their flight and charm checks, as they're quick and generally likable. Unless you meet someone that doesn't like children. Teens automatically receive the rebellious strength. When rolling stat checks, teens add +1 to their fight and brawn checks, as they're pugnacious and in their prime. Adults automatically receive the skilled at blank strength. This skill, selected by the character's player, will correspond to their life experiences, often representing a job they've held or a skill they've honed over the years. When rolling a stat checks, adults add +1 to their brains and grit checks. Even if they aren't always geniuses, they've seen enough of the world to know what it's about and to not get shaken by much. Instead of writing those blog posts. Wow, man, that's crazy. I can't believe that. Wow. She's crazy. She's doing her little point. She's pointing. Yeah, May May, tell them. Let them know. I don't know who you're barking at. I think that he said, like, he came out and said, yeah, you know, it's just been a really tough time. That dog ain't right, dude. What a little weirdo. Someone walked by the house. That's what happened. Selecting strengths, a flaw, and a name. Once you've selected your trope and age, choose from the strengths and flaws associated with that character. Both will have mechanical implications for your character's name, character related to adversity tokens. I know that word. I know how to talk. All right. Strengths are mechanical advantages that your character will have when playing the game. Some are always active, meaning you do not need to spend adversity tokens to use them. Others will have an adversity token cost listed in their description. And so we'll get into this more, but adversity tokens are something that you get when you fail a roll. I believe you start with one, but when you fail a roll, you gain an adversity token. So it's kind of used as almost a reward for failing because it means you're gathering these tokens and able to use a strength if you have a strength that costs an adversity token. He said something about fascism and that's why it's taking. Yeah, he did. He sure did. Failing forward. Yes, that is the term. I like to reward her defending though. Is it defending? I don't think that it's defending. A flaw will help you develop your character's personality and will give you the opportunity for earning more adversity tokens. When you fail a roll because of acting on your flaw, you'll earn an additional adversity token. So if, I don't know what the flaws are, but let's say you are, one of your flaws is you're like greedy or something, and you are trying to steal something because you're greedy, and you fail that roll. You gain an additional adversity token, so you gain 2 tokens. I don't know if that's an actual flaw. It's probably not, but there's your example. But make sure you're not leaning too heavily into your flaw and making the game less fun for your fellow players or acting in ways that no reasonable person would. For example, if they're being chased by a monster, even as absent-minded character wouldn't get distracted by a Rubik's Cube while the rest of the gang is busily trying to barricade the door. I think that is an important note. It is important to even... I hate when people are like, well, that's what my character would do. Yeah, but you know what? I'm not having fun now because your character is acting like an asshole. So just be cognizant of your character and how your character will be perceived by the rest of the table. Choose 2 strengths and 1 flaw from the ones associated with your character's trope. Or if you want to draw from the larger list when deciding, you may. The full list can be found on these appendices. Now, give your character a first name or a nickname that they go by. Hold off on a last name in case, as you're introducing your characters and doing relationship questions, you find that they're related to another character. While in real life, we can't tell much about a person just from their name, when choosing for your character, lean into evocative names. There's a big difference between what Billy and William evoke. And this is kind of the... whatchamacallit. This is the example they give for our players, Carlos, Yasmin, and Brianna, what they are doing. It's what my character would do, players, when they start to impede on the fun of others. Yeah. Because they have that, it's that main character syndrome, you know? That where they think that their character is so cool and so interesting, and what their character is doing matters so much more than what every other character is doing. And you need to be mindful because you are not the only player at the table. I actively leave them out of my game. Get out. Leave this place. You don't belong here. Okay. Including disabled characters or neurotypical characters. Neuroatypical. I think that's supposed to be neurodivergent. Is that not the right word? Should it be neurodivergent? Or is neuroatypical a correct term? I don't think I've ever seen it referred to as neuroatypical. Neuroatypical is synonymous. Neuroatypical is the new term. Interesting. I've only seen it referred to as neurodivergent. Neuroatypical does not roll off the tongue as well. I don't like it. For some players, a traditionally able-bodied or neurotypical... See, because it's just like... You have to really pronounce the atypical part. This is me being nitpicky. A traditionally able-bodied or neurotypical character might not fit their vision of their character. A player may want to play a character who is physically disabled or whose brain is neurodivergent. You just use... Never mind. Whatever. When including these characters, it's vital that neither disability nor neurodivergence are played as jokes, caricatures, villain motivations, or targets for exotification or pity. The player introducing the character with a disability or neurodivergence will establish how much it impacts the narrative. For example, a character in a wheelchair could establish that they would have trouble in chases, or they could establish that being in a wheelchair won't affect the narrative. Or they could decide that they'll let the group know when they want their characters using a wheelchair to impact the narrative. It's entirely up to them, though other players can, of course, ask them to alter their role-playing if it's upsetting to them. They're similar but different. I'm looking it up now. Thank you, Ad. Ad is my fact checker. Let me put that down a little bit. Ultimately, playing a character with a disability or a neurodivergence is about playing the character you want to play. As long as you aren't causing harm by perpetuating stereotypes or mocking identities, you're within the rules of the game. You can opt into playing these characters, but you can't opt into making fun of groups. And then it talks about Kelsang has a persistent injury from a workplace accident some years ago. As a result, she and the GM agreed that she won't be able to stand for long periods of time or walk for more than a mile without resting. Yasmin says that this industry won't define Kelsang, though they agree that this is a place where the GM can create tension for her during the game. Oswald has ADHD, and this is something that he tells the GM and the other players will affect him narratively. On one hand, Oswald will tend to lose focus when trying to maintain concentration on a task for too long. On the other hand, he's sometimes able to make connections between seemingly disparate events or clues. So it's, you know, you can have something and you can have something where it's just a part of your character, where it's kind of like not even really not a main focal point of your character. It doesn't define your character as a whole. But it is an interesting thing to have, and then you can have it where your character is affected by this in both positive and negative ways, which I think is kind of, as someone with like autism and ADHD, like, yeah. Option, creating a character from scratch. Some players may wish to create their character entirely from scratch rather than the beginning with a pre-made trope. Doing so takes longer, but it allows for unique characters, ones who don't fit into any single mold. If it is a route you're interested in, we encourage you take it. Using the blank player sheet, so it says, begin assigning dice that you'll use for your stats. The best way to do this is assign your D20 stat and your D4 stat, then think about how your character uses their highest stat to compensate for their lowest one. Then assign the other dice to the other stats based on the characterization. Next, select your age, child, teen, or adult. Remember to give yourself the appropriate bonuses based on your age. Then select your other two strengths, referring to the list in Appendix D, that fit your vision for your character. Then select your flaw. And then finally give your character a first name. This is a cool little bit of art. I like that. Moving on with introductions and questions. Now that you have the basics of your characters sketched out, think about how you're related to the other characters at the table. We encourage you to make these decisions based on what other players tell you about their characters. While it probably wouldn't make much sense for every character in a 5-player game to be the very best of friends with every other character at the table, each character should have at least one meaningful connection to at least half of the other characters. This will give your GM ways to bring your characters together in the narrative. And on the other hand, in a game with only 2 or 3 players, it might make sense for everyone to have a close connection with the other characters. To do this, after the first player introduces their character, a player who thinks they have a relationship to that character should introduce themselves, explaining how they know the previous character. So this is very much like an improv thing. So, you know, I would introduce my character, and then Ad would pop in and be like, yeah, my character would be best friends with your character, and this is who my character is and kind of what they're about. And then someone else would pop in and be like, actually, I don't really like Ad's character that much. We're kind of rivals, and this is why we're rivals. And then they would introduce their character. I think that's a really fun and unique way to kind of build those connections out in real time. I love character connections, but new players always seem so afraid of it. Yeah, I think it's mostly just like kind of like a moment of like being shy of like, I feel like I've had that where I'm like, oh, you know, my character she's just here. And kind of not wanting to impose or even make an assumption about another person's character when really it's not a hindrance. It just adds on to the storyline. So yeah, I think it's kind of just not wanting to like impose themselves and their character on like another person without sort of like getting the vibe first. Because that's what my character would do. Shut up, Bashman. Hold up. What'd I do? I was just giving an example of how this little round table of character introductions and connections would work. Let's see. As you play, your relationships will develop, deepen, or change. Here are some possible relationships: parents and children, siblings, step-siblings and half-siblings, cousins, classmates, teachers and students, coaches and athletes, best friends or worst enemies, neighbors, mentors and mentees, bosses and employees, and significant others, spouses, or exes. This is a good time to start talking as your character. We know each other from back when we were in high school, rather than my character dated this character for a few years. That's something that I always have a really hard time with. Oh, hey, Mike, how's it going? Can I get a shout out for Icar and Ink, if anyone is around? I saw you were playing the casting of it's the supermassive game that is Dead by Daylight. Casting of Frank Stone. How was that? Where I was going. Yeah, I have a really hard time sometimes with speaking in character. Because I will usually, like, let's say, like, for BTM, I'll usually like, oh, Cassie's gonna go up to this. I always have a hard time being like, yeah, and I go up to this person. I want to get better about talking in like the first person when it comes to describing what my character is doing. Good so far, but as they say, keep them wanting more. I've heard some good things so far about it, so I think I'm probably gonna check it out for October. Play a little spooky game during October. But I'm glad you're liking it so far. Let's see. Having broadly established how you know and don't know each other, each of you will answer questions about the other characters. You'll do this one at a time, passing the list of questions around the table and collaborating to make the established relationships more complex and to hint at information about who you don't know. This process will make the story of the game richer, even before the strange events start happening. I'm doing it for Halloween. Remember? I'll be busy playing Dragon Age on Halloween, so I gotta do all my spooky games before. Depending on the length of time you have for character creation, you could take one of 3 approaches to answering the questions: quick start, one-sided, or complete. For the quick start, each of you will answer just one question about one of the other players. For the one-sided version, each of you will answer just one question about each other player. For each player, choose one question from the positive and character you don't know. Negative and character you don't know. And then for the complete version, you'll answer 2 questions, a positive one and a negative one about each character you know. We strongly recommend taking the time to do the complete questions. The answers will give you the richest storytelling and role-playing. It will also give your GM more hooks to use later. Me too. Yes, so they're doing I guess they're doing the preview event for Dragon Age Spellguard this week in San Francisco, and everyone, like all of like these big names in the video game industry are like posting about how they were invited, and I'm like, I'm just a little jealous. I hope you guys have fun. I honestly understand the struggle. Jesus, I can speak, I swear. I have a massive advantage of being an actor and being able just to approach people in character, but the average person doesn't have that exposure. Yeah, so I was a theater kid, but I was the tech part of the theater kid. I was behind the scenes. I didn't have to interact with people. Okay, so from what I can understand, atypical is more so an umbrella term for any kind of a diagnosis of a brain processing information differently, while divergent is a more colloquial term that is used for learning disorders, being on the spectrum, and executive functions. Atypical is okay, got you. Someone complained that the 7 players aren't hot, and I'm like, Nev? That Nev's not hot? Are you blind? Lace Harding? We were all thirsting for Lace Harding in Inquisition. Fucking idiots. All this hype, I hope that... So I have high hopes. I have high hopes. They've been crushed before, but I have high hopes. God, I hope that I don't get boned. Man, let's be honest though, the game could be bad, and I would still play the fuck out of it. I just love Dragon Age, man. Love World. Alright. My hope is that BioWare is returning to the original formula. What is that formula? Detail out to me. Theater football kid started off as prop slash set design. Yeah, I did a lot of the set design and stuff too. Speaking of being boned, a package finally shipped. What the fuck does that mean? What does that mean? Oh, you're replaying 1 and 2, so I believe you. Focusing heavy on the story and not so much the gameplay as much. Yeah. Bone sick shit. Hey, Bull, how's it going? The thing I ordered for Bones. Yeah, I think that I'm hoping that. Well, here's the thing. Like, I don't. We'll hopefully be back. Yeah, no worries. I'm still gonna talk about Dragon Age even as you're leaving. I don't think that. So obviously, Dragon Age Origins was super heavy focused on like the storytelling, but it was also pretty focused on on the gameplay, because you couldn't go into any area without getting fucking your shit pushed in by enemies, which wouldn't have been a problem, but like the actual mechanics for combat weren't great. So I think as long as like we focus on the gameplay by making the mechanics for combat better, then it's fine. I don't mind if there's a lot of combat, as long as combat doesn't feel like a constant slog. Anyway. Does that feel good? I was doing that to Joel today. That's just in my head. Okay, bonded actions. For games that want to both emphasize relationships between characters and add another mechanical choice for the characters, GMs and players can agree to use bonded actions. These are a way to focus on what a pair of characters often do together, and thus the skills that they can use in a pinch. After answering relationship questions, you and another character who know each other very well may agree to have your characters have a bonded action. This benefit enables the two of you, once per session, to do something together that you've practiced intentionally or unintentionally many times before. This practice will allow you to make collaborative checks more easily, given the experience that you have working together. Narratively, after selecting this bonded action, the two of you explain the backstory of these shared experiences, giving at least 3 meaningful experiences you've had together related to it, and any other details you would like. During play, you can use that bonded action once per session when it would make narrative sense based on your backstory. For example, 2 characters select heavy lifters, which gives them a +3 when they make a brawn check together, because they're on the football team together. They could certainly apply this bonus if they're both trying to tackle an NPC or if they're trying to throw something between them. However, if they're trying to simply pick up a car, they couldn't pick... There's a typo here. Pretty sure. They couldn't picking up... I think there's that. That's... However, if they're simply trying to pick up a car, they couldn't. Picking up heavy and mobile objects isn't part of football. No. Okay, that's fine. No, it's fine. Not a typo. It just was clunky. Picking up heavy and mobile objects isn't part of football, so they wouldn't have practiced that together. In addition, you must both actually be able to help each other for the bonded action to occur. The football players above couldn't make a bonded action check if they're in separate locations. After all, they can't tackle someone together if they're not tackling the same person. Mechanically, when using a bonded action, you gain a benefit, which can be used once per session. Remember, the bonded action must make sense for the bond that the 2 characters have. If you don't see one in the chart, that would make sense for you and another character to talk to them and the GM and make up a new one. Not a type. The comma after the car. I'm saying that the sentence actually speaking it out loud was clunky. I was more so thinking of pufferfish eating a carrot when I think, No, I think of the baby covered in peanut butter. Really need to work on my Kids on Bikes Halloween one-shot. Well, that's why I'm reading this, because we're going to be running Kids on Bikes next month. Nothing worse than coming across a typo while reading. Kind of ruins that experience for me. That's happened a lot of, like, because I play a lot of indie games, so I experience some typos occasionally. I forgot what game it was where I was like, oh, this is like, there's a lot of typos in this. Can't remember. Let's see. Finishing touches. Full name. If you're waiting to complete your name, do that now. Keep in mind the relatives probably have the same last name, but not always. Motivation. Write down something that strongly motivates you. It might not be the thing that drives all of your decisions, but it should certainly drive many of them, especially your big decisions. It could be a specific motivation. It could be more general. Or it could do with concealing some information. Don't let the others find the business, blah, 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 blah. If you feel it's appropriate for them to know, you can share this information with the other players. Most likely, you'll just share this motivation with the GM. Typically, children will be motivated by curiosity, teens will be motivated by social factors, adults will be motivated by holding onto or protecting what they have. Fear. Write down something that you're afraid of. In terms of role-playing your fear, you will, of course, want to avoid your fears, and when faced with them, you'll behave more irrationally. Ultimately, what you fear in the game is up to you. Mechanically, fears will have 3 effects, which we'll talk about more in planned actions and snap decisions. In short, though, facing a fear will mechanically limit your choices. In terms of what you're likely to fear, children will usually fear things that rationally they shouldn't fear and don't fear things that they ought to. Teens are all over the place. Some teens are still scared of things that scare them as children, but they'll tend to be very tight-lipped about these fears. Few adults have the fears that children have, and most of them aren't worried about those kinds of social things that concern teens. Rather, they're typically afraid of things being taken from them, whether that's their families, their homes, or their livelihoods. Obligations. Regardless of how easy or difficult your character's life is, that they definitely have things that are required to do. For children, that might be as simple as they have to go to school and keep their room clean, or that they could be solely responsible for caring for their younger siblings overnight anytime their single father works a double at the factory. These don't have to be tangible actions either. A spouse of the school's principal may feel an obligation to remain morally upright and kind to everyone so that their partner's reputation isn't harmed. While these obligations won't have any mechanical impact on the game, they both give the GM something to lean on and give players a way to think more carefully about their character. Adults are jaded. True. Adults are not scared of, except me, I'm scared of the dark. Adults are not scared of the dark and the things that lurk in the dark. They're scared about taxes. I'm also scared of taxes. So, I don't know what that says about me. Knack. Thinking about your character's backstory, what is something that your character can always do even when they're under pressure? This will be your knack, something that you can do once per session without having to roll a check for it. Instead, you'll get a 10 on that check, but only once per session. To make your knack thinking about an ing verb that describes what you're good at, like identifying local plants, computer programming, or playing soccer. A good way to think about knacks is how this might help you in an interesting, unexpected ways during the game. For example, having playing soccer as a knack doesn't mean that you only can apply those skills during a game. You could also apply this knack when making a check to run roughly the distance of a soccer field under a certain time, or when you're trying to keep pushing yourself physically like you have to do at soccer practice. In short, players are absolutely encouraged to apply their knack creatively rather than narrowly. However, the application of the knack has to make sense. If someone needs to catch something thrown at them, the knack of playing soccer definitely won't help them unless they've established their team's goalie. I need to take a drink. I knew that just yapping for an hour and a half would hurt my throat hole. The final finishing touch is indicating what you have in your backpack, literally and figuratively. What items are you never without? For children or teens, these might literally be in their backpack. For adults, these essential items might be in the trunk of their car. Ultimately, though, they're wherever you want them, wherever would make the most sense for you. Figuratively speaking, the backpack is also a good place to list advantages that you have over other people. While this doesn't have to include all of the ways that you're privileged, it would be a good place to think about more intangible resources to have at your disposal. For example, your backpack might indicate that your parents are exceptionally supportive and do everything they can to give you the resources to succeed at school. It might indicate that your bad relationship with your parents has given you a strong sense of self-reliance and the ability to do for yourself. The intangible resources in your backpack won't have a mechanical impact on the game, but they should give you places to turn if you need help in getting out of the problem, or tension if that resource is suddenly not available. That was a phrase. Trope-specific questions. Each trope has 2 questions about your character that should be answered at some point during the character creation process. So if you haven't answered yet, make sure to do those now. The answers to these questions do not need to be shared with the other players at the table, but they can be if you would like to. Now we get to the bikes. The actual bike part of Kids on Bikes. Bikes. The bond between a kid and their bike is an almost sacred one. Unless you can convince a trustworthy older sibling to drive you around, it's the only way to get from one place to another without your parents knowing exactly where you are at all times. Each character can decide if they want to build a custom bike or if they want to receive a gift bike based on their trope and age. In the same game, it's fine for some characters to customize and some to choose gifts. If you want to decide the details of your ride, you can elect to build your own bike. To start, choose a color and an upgrade for your bike from the options in Appendix J. Each color has an adjective associated with it, which represents either what you are or what you want to be. When on your bike, you receive a specific benefit based on the bike's color. That's fun. That's a really, really fun mechanic. To make something as the color of your bike give you a little bonus to something. Simply choose one color and one upgrade, then decide how you personalize your bike. Or if you want to get rolling more quickly, or if you're feeling torn, you can elect to receive a gift bike based on your trope and age. Finally, figure out your bike's name, how you got it, and your favorite memory involving your bike. Then share those details with the group. These stories can be as developed or as brief as you'd like them to be. It all depends on how much your bike means. Oh, adults should get segways. I wonder if there's... So here are the bikes. So this is interesting. So black, you get a +1 to fight checks. Black is intense. Blue is trustworthy. You get +1 to charm checks. Gold is flashy. If you perform a stunt, you get a +3 to charm checks. Gray is level-headed. If you know the area, you cannot get lost. Green is strong. You get +1 to brawn. Neon pink is fast. You get +1 to flight. Orange is outgoing. Each time you succeed at a check, an ally of your choice receives an adversity token. Purple is decisive. You may treat snap decisions as planned decisions. We'll go over those at some point. Red is ambitious. Each adversity token you spend during a check adds an additional +1 to your roll. Rusty, silver, white, and then upgrade, banana seat, basket, bell, first aid kit, milk crate, pegs, tassels, 10 speeder, trading cards, pedal powered lights. That's fun. I like that. I like that a lot. That's a really fun. I think I'm gonna use that. Okay, chapter 4. We're like cruising through this. I think we might. Let me see. Let me go back to the index. There's 7 chapters, plus the little adventure. So we might just read through chapter 4, playing the game, and then we'll stop, and then we'll pick it back up in 2 weeks. Because we're about an hour and a half in, so. If you've never played a role-playing game before, we're excited that you're playing Kids on Bikes as your first game. While it can sound intimidating, role-playing becomes pretty intuitive pretty quickly. In short, when you role-play, you're taking on the role of a character, someone like you in some ways and unlike you in others. Rather than always doing what you, the player, think is best, you'll be doing what your character would most likely do in that moment. Generally speaking, you'll be responding to these situations and circumstances that the GM puts in front of you. There isn't really any way to roleplay quote-unquote correctly, as long as everyone at the table is having a good time. During Kids on Bikes specifically, you, the other players, and the GM will tell the story together. The GM will help guide the action of the story and will make the quote-unquote big picture stuff happen, often by asking questions or putting your characters into situations. But you'll have a lot of control over what you do and how you face the situations the GM throws at you. Often the GM will even give you some say over decisions outside of your character. You'll even have control over which parts you skip over. If your characters are going to have a pretty run-of-the-mill day at school, you don't need to tell the story of all 9 periods. Think of the game as the important scenes that will carry the narrative forward. Focus on the parts that promote action, excitement, and intrigue. The main thing to focus on, whether this is your first or 331st time playing a role-playing game, is having fun with everyone at the table. Do that and you'll be role-playing correctly. Which is important. I think, to note that, because I felt this way going into my first game. I was really worried because I had never done any sort of role-playing before. I have like a background in writing. I've written a lot of fiction. However, I've never done any sort of text-based role-play. So that was like a really scary thing going in. That was the thing that I was kind of most worried about. I was like, will I be able to do this? Will I be able to get into the headspace of my character and think like them and role-play? And I think that most people will find that if they just allow themselves to be a little bit silly or feel a little bit silly, yeah, they can. You can do it. Because I think that's probably the thing that most people have like the most trouble with, is allowing themselves to feel silly. And that's not saying that your character is silly. It's sometimes when you're role-playing and you've never really done it before, you feel a little bit silly. You feel a little bit silly, you know, talking in a funny voice, or saying things you wouldn't normally say. But it does make it easier when everyone else around you is also getting into character. So I think that's really important. Like, if you really want to get into it, and you want other people to also get into roleplay, like, allow yourself to feel silly. That's my TED Talk for today. Thanks for coming, guys. Encouraging collaborative play. While the expectations you set up and the town you created in Session 0 will help you steer your game to what you all want, it's important to think about how you'll play with each other. These tips on playing collaboratively will help keep your game going in the best direction. No one gets left behind. If one person stops their bike, everyone stops. So no splitting the party, guys. The same rules apply to playing games together. Abandoning each other isn't an option. When you play games together, sometimes a storyline can threaten to run off and leave someone behind. This means the player may have nothing to do. Similarly, a player may feel disconnected from the story or like their ideas don't matter. Paying attention to your fellow players and your GM is everyone's responsibility. That's my TED Talk, she says, after reading a book to us for an hour. Like an hour and a half, dude. If you feel like you're being left out or left behind, speak up. It's vital that you advocate for yourself and work together with the table to make sure you and everyone else is having a good time. So I think that's really important. I think we should do a counter for how many times I'm like, I think that's really important. Advocate for yourself. You cannot go into any sort of situation expecting that someone else is going to advocate for you. And I know it might seem scary having to go and speak up in front of people, even if like they are your friends and some of your closest friends. Sometimes that's still scary. But I think you have to. You have to advocate for yourself, and you can't expect anyone else to do it for you. And at the end of the day, if you advocate for yourself and you let people know how you're feeling, you're going to have a better experience at the table rather than just keeping your mouth shut and pushing through. Because I've done that before. I've kind of just kept my mouth shut in situations at tables and just pushed through, and I was miserable. I was having a really bad time. And some of my closest friends can attest to me just like being like, hi, I'm having a really bad time right now and I don't want to be in this game. And if I had just advocated for myself and been like, hey, I don't like the way that this particular storyline is going, or I feel like my character is being left out intentionally, like, I would have had a much better time. Or if whoever had turned around and said, well, that's your problem, I could have been like, okay, so you actually don't care about my feelings. I can leave this table knowing that I have done what I needed to do and tried my best to work out the situation, but you were unwilling to compromise with me. So goodbye. Which is also important. If you have a GM who is not willing to compromise with you on basic things, you shouldn't feel guilty about leaving that table. I'm cutting out the yaps in my timing. But the yaps is me talking about the book sometimes, and sometimes Dragon Age. Taking turns. In a game with multiple main characters, and that's important, there are multiple main characters, learning to be invested in everyone and sharing the spotlight is key. Each of you should feel like you get about equal spotlight time. Some weeks, certain characters may shine more, but it should never feel like they are secondary or tertiary characters. Even as a player, make sure you give everyone time to shine. If you realize that you're making your character have most of the fun, step aside and let the other characters take center stage. I feel like I know a lot of people who need to read that line and then read it back. Because again, I've been a part of games where there is that one character, that one player who likes to involve themselves in every single aspect of the story. When, yeah, this one's about you, Bull, specifically. It's important to let other people, you're not the only person playing in the game. You know, you have to let others have their own time. I miss you too. Lies. Nope. No lies, only truths. But yeah, I think it's important. I think it's important to... And I know sometimes that you can get caught up. This is me speaking directly to you, Bull. I know that sometimes you can get caught up and hydrating. You get caught up and you kind of don't even realize there's not that you know, at the end of a scene or at the end of a session, to take a step back as a player and reflect and say, okay, was there any moments where I could have helped spotlight someone else that wasn't getting enough spotlight in this session? Was there any moments where I stepped on someone else's words and cut into a scene that wasn't meant for me? And I think that self-awareness is key, because if you don't have that self-awareness, you are not going to get invited back to tables. Because there are some people that I would never play D&D or TTRPGs with ever again because they do not have that self-awareness. Embracing improv. There are 2 major rules of improv that are useful when role-playing together. Both you and the GM should use them together to help prevent story stagnation and to help incorporate everyone's ideas into the story. So, obviously, yes and is for when you like someone's idea and want to add to it or adjust. A person will state their idea and you will respond with a yes, but also add your own ideas to it, building onto the initial thought. And no but is for when you don't want to use their idea, but want to offer something instead along the same lines in terms of theme or function. After saying no, suggest another idea influenced by what they suggested while removing the part that you found unsuitable for the game. I think it's important growth as a player to enjoy others' moments as well, not just giving the spotlight, but enjoying someone. Yes, that's also very true. Actually, generally, like, enjoying... Like, I feel like in, like, I'm just gonna use Vampire for the example, like, I enjoy watching Creep and Bones play their characters, and I enjoy watching things unfold for their characters. And I enjoy watching their character arcs and their stories, their own personal stories develop. And I think that's, one, because we're friends, we're all friends, and we all love each other. But 2, I think that as like a role player, I can't develop my own character by myself. Especially in a collaborative storytelling experience. If I was just RPing with myself, that would not be a whole lot of fun and there would be no character growth. So it's important to not be a dickhead at the table. Okay. Now we get on to stat checks. Collaborative. If you want to tell a story with no input from anyone else, go write a book. Don't play with yourself when other people are around. Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Bull. I'm glad that that is what you took away from this conversation. Okay, so stat checks. When you're playing, anytime you do something that runs the risk of failure, the GM will have you make a stat check. So you will roll. They will set a numerical difficulty for the action and let you know it is. So you go into the roll knowing what basically the DC is. Then you decide if you want to go ahead with the check. You'll roll the appropriate stat die and check the value of that die against the difficulty. If you roll the maximum value of the die, you get a quote-unquote lucky break, meaning that you re-roll the die and add the maximum value that you rolled the first time to the new roll. You can get multiple lucky breaks on a single check. For more of these surprising successes, see lucky breaks on page 50. So it's, if anyone's played, I don't know what system it is where the dice explodes. I think it might be this system. Maybe they don't call it that. Whatever. So the dice explodes essentially when you max out and then you roll again. So you could get a, you can get a very good success. It's this system, is it? They must have changed that. That must be new to this edition. Because I think maybe it's Kids on Brooms. It could be Kids on Brooms because I know I heard it in the Mischief and Magic and they were using Kids on Brooms. So it could be Kids on Brooms and not the Kids on Bikes version. Yeah, Kids on Brooms is the same, so Teens in Space. No, they just use the term lucky break officially, but everyone calls it exploding. Gotta come from somewhere. Okay, so after you finish rolling, you and any players whose characters are with you may spend an adversity token to increase your result. So that is nice that you can have your friends or the other players give you an adversity token in order to help you succeed on a roll. So 20 or greater, a task which is most incredible could even possibly succeed, but if they succeed, it will be one of the most impressive things a character has ever done. 17 to 19, a task where the success would be incredible and impressive. This too is nearly a guaranteed failure. 13 to 16, a task where success is extraordinary, but decidedly possible for those who are truly skilled at it. 10 to 12, a task where success is impressive, but unsurprising for those who are skilled at it. 7 to 9, a task where success is almost certain for those very skilled at it, but not for those who aren't. 3 to 6, a task where success is likely for all, but those who aren't skilled or have a low stat at the field. And then 1 or 2, a task where success is nearly guaranteed, except in extreme cases. Choosing a stat for the check. And this is the one that I really had a problem with going into Girl Talk using first edition. I had because I didn't read through all of the rules because I knew I was going to use them a little loosey-goosey. Macy got up and it scared me. I even sometimes in D&D I have like this problem of not quite knowing what ability or skill I want players to roll with. As in life, there are always multiple ways to solve a problem. If a character is being confronted by bullies, it may seem like they have to start swinging and hope it goes well. Fight. Or turn heel and run and hope they're faster than the bullies. Flight. But depending on who the character is, they might use other stats instead. A character with high charm might convince the bullies that they'll share a secret entrance in the movie theater if they don't beat them up. A character with high grit might tell them that they have taken worse beatings before breakfast to make it seem not worth the aggressor's time. A character with high brains might talk the bullies in circles until they let them go because the bullies are too confused to throw a punch. A character with high brawn might physically intimidate their aggressors to get them to back down. There are multiple ways you can solve your problems. Called Exploding Dice and Savage Worlds and a couple of other games. Oh, okay. Yeah, this isn't like, it's not a unique, because I know VTM, I think at least 5th edition of VTM, maybe, has it where the dice explodes. So if you roll a 10, you keep rolling. If you're not sure what kind of check something will call for, you can always just describe what you're doing and the GM will tell you what stat to use and the difficulty of the check. I do think that's nice, though, is that you can argue, you can make an argument for what kind of skill you want to use for something, and as long as it actually makes sense for you to use that skill, the GM will allow it. Failing a roll. Remember, in Kids on Bikes, failing a roll isn't all bad. First and foremost, it gives you an adversity token, which you can use to succeed when you really need it, especially if you pool it with other adversity tokens, or to activate your character's strengths. Adversity tokens, or ATs, give you more options later on, so sometimes failing is actually a good thing. Second, failure can and should push forward the narrative. A failed roll means that what the character wants to happen doesn't happen, but that doesn't mean that what happens is bad for the story. For example, if the character tries to hack a computer but aren't able to, it might mean that they have to seek out an NPC to help them with it. That character might, in turn, inadvertently give them a clue that helps them puzzle out a mystery. Or if a character fails to escape on foot from government forces pursuing her, she might be brought to a facility that holds the secret to the next part of the adventure. So while failures won't be what your character wants, they should almost always feel good for the story, and should give the group more directions to take the narrative you're building together. So yeah, I like that that's kind of built into the system as well, failing. Because, I don't know, sometimes it can feel bad when you fail a roll and something inexplicably just fucking horrible happens, and you get nothing from it. And it just feels like the GM is just making horrible things happen to you to make horrible things happen to you because you failed a roll. But it's nice to get like the adversity tokens and have the opportunity to gain something from it as well. That was a nice timing, Maybe. You waited until I was done talking. I appreciate that. Tell us when you're having one of those nights where you can't roll above. Yeah. Yeah, when you're just like, a fail. No, that's a 1. That's a 1. Oh, look at that. That's another 1. Great. Cool. I'm gonna go walk off a short bridge. Great. She's considerate. She's a considerate lady. Adversity tokens. In addition to helping the story move forward in unexpected directions, failing a roll also helps by giving you an adversity token. Adversity tokens, or ATs, help you in 3 ways. First, you can use them to improve subsequent rolls. Second, you can use them to activate strengths, some of which require that you spend AT. Third, with the GM's permission, you can use AT to ignore your fears. After rolling to try to make a check, you can spend your AT to improve the roll. The improvement can make a failure into a success, make your failure less harmful, or make your success more extreme. In addition, characters in the same scene as a character making a check, may spend AT to improve that character's roll. Unless you have a strength that indicates otherwise, each AT you spend adds 1 to your roll or the roll of the character you're helping. So spending 2 AT would change a roll 5 to a 7. So one thing that I really liked about the Sagas system is that when you're helping another character, you are more incentivized to help another character, because if you help another character, they get more out of it than you would if you just helped yourself. And I wish they kind of did something with like that with this. Like, make it worthwhile for me to spend my adversity token, and obviously you should just spend your adversity token to help your friend, blah, 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 blah. But make it worthwhile for me. Like, if I spend an adversity token to help someone, like, that should give them like a +2. I think that would be a cool little like homebrew rule I would implement. Trying to incentivize, because I know sometimes you just want to hoard up those advantages that while you can, because they are not an infinite resource. Unless you just keep rolling 1s. I think certain traits do that. Maybe. I'll go and look at the traits. Let's do Appendix D. Where is that? GM record sheet. They do have a lot of like playbooks though, that's quite nice. Let's see. Cool under pressure may spend 1 adversity token to take half of your die's value instead of rolling on a snap decision. Easygoing, gain 2 adversity tokens when you fail instead of 1. Gross, you have some kind of gross bodily trick that you can do on command. Heroic, you do not need the GM's permission to spend adversity tokens to ignore fears. Intuitive, may spend 1 adversity token to ask the GM about your surroundings. Loyal, each of the adversity tokens you spend to help your friends. Oh, there we go. I like that. See, that gives you like an incentive. Like if you want to like really fucking help buff out your friends, choose loyal. Prepared, may spend 2 adversity tokens to just happen to have 1 commonplace item with you. Protective, add +3 to rolls when defending one of your friends. Quick healing, free for kids. You recover from injuries more quickly and don't suffer lasting effects. Rebellious, add +3 to rolls to persuade or resist persuasion. Skilled at, yeah, you choose a skill. You are assumed to succeed when you even moderately difficult checks, blah, blah, blah. Tough. You roll a combat roll. If you lose a combat roll, add +3 to the negative number. You will still lose the roll no matter what, but could reduce your loss to -1. Treasure Hunter, you may spend 1 adversity token to find a useful item in your surroundings. Unassuming, may spend 2 adversity tokens to not be seen within reason. Wealthy, may spend money as though you're in a higher age bracket. Yeah, those are pretty cool. The loyal one, definitely, like, I feel like you get the most bang for your buck. Like in Mentopolis, the fix gave 2 for every 1 AT spent for someone. Yeah, I like that. Finally, in especially pivotal moments, your GM may allow you to spend AT to ignore your fear. For more information on that, see Facing Your Fears on page 56. At the start of the game, each of you has 3 AT, and you'll earn more as you tell your story, so use them frequently. Lucky Breaks! I really like that art. That's some good art. Lucky Breaks. When you roll the highest value on a die, you roll that die again and add the results together to get the total for your check. If you roll the maximum value of the die multiple times, you get to keep rolling. Spending AT to improve the sum of the roll does not cause a lucky break. They only occur if you naturally roll the highest value. When you get a lucky break, the way you succeed must reflect that you have accomplished something beyond what you could do on your own. The outcome should be influenced in part by external forces. This could be something fortunate that happens to assist you, or something unfortunate that affects your adversary, or the obstacle you face. Work with your GM to narrate the story of this roll. I like that. So, I was going to read that, but much more to this chapter. Quite a bit. Damn. Yeah, quite a bit, actually. Tiered checks. In some cases, success and failure can be along even more of a spectrum than they already are, and it might be impossible to fully fail a check. In such cases, your game could include tiered checks, ones where there's no chance of failure, and the value of your roll will determine what you get out of the check. That's good. Because sometimes it feels a little... It can feel a little silly when you roll like a 20 on something, and then it's just like, yeah, you get the door open. Yeah. Congratulations. Good examples of tier checks would be ones where a character is trying to do something as quickly as possible, as smoothly as possible, or faster than another character. Or if there are degrees of success, that could call for a tiered check too. If, for example, characters have the afternoon to search the library for information about livestock that went missing 2 decades ago, they'll definitely find something, but a check will determine just how much. So that's nice. That's nice to have that built into the system. As a GM, where you can kind of help. Because it's like, I know in the past, this is something that I've done where if a character is looking for information in like a library or something and like they roll bad, and like, oh, you don't really find a whole lot, you know, you find like kind of this useless information. Whereas, yeah, you're going to find the information in this system, you're going to find this information, but if you roll like a 20, you're going to find a plethora of information and so much. And here are all of the details of the information that you found. Planned actions and snap decisions. This is a very interesting mechanic that they have in Kids on Bikes. Although the GM always sets a numerical difficulty, there are 2 distinct kinds of stat checks: planned actions and snap decisions. Planned actions are stat checks when you have the time to think about the best course of action and perhaps work with your friends. Characters are sitting at a kitchen table trying to break a coded message that someone has left for them and have all night to do it. That's definitely a planned action. Your character needs to climb up a wall to sneak into an abandoned factory and has the cover of night and no one in pursuit. That's a planned action. In short, planned actions are when the conditions are relatively optimal to achieve something. Snap decisions, on the other hand, are choices that have to be made quickly under bad conditions, and are thus more chaotic and unpredictable. If your character is being chased through a cave, stat checks they make while fleeing in panic will definitely be snap decisions. If your character is under any grade of kind of pressure, that would likely be a snap decision too. Remember, each of you has at least one knack, discussed on page 39, that allows you to take a 10 on a check relevant to your knack rather than rolling. This can be used during a planned action or a snap decision. Remember, you and the GM should interpret a knack broadly, not narrowly. At the same time, though, make sure it actually makes sense to apply your knack. The GMs call whether something is a planned action or a snap decision. The players, though, feel free to convince the GM on how they can take it a moment of calm to make a planned action in the setting that might seem to call for a snap decision. And then there's a little flowchart. I love a flowchart. That's good. That's a good flowchart. So I think this is different from the first edition. So I believe that they added knack. I don't believe that was in the first edition. I believe they added knack because prior, if you were making a snap decision, you could choose to forego the roll and instead take half of the specific dice, that die that you would have to roll. And that would work great, like if you had a D20 in Ron and you're trying to lift something and the GM was like, hey, this is a difficulty rating of 10. And you're like, well, I'm trying to lift this while getting chased so I can slide under it. I'm trying to lift this grated door to slide under it while I'm being chased. And that's a snap decision. And instead of rolling for it and possibly failing and getting trapped, as a snap decision, you could have taken just half the roll, a D20, so you would have 10, which would mean you would succeed. So I believe that knack is instead replacing that feature when it comes to snap decisions. That is one change that I know for sure has occurred going from 1E to 2E. Which is kind of a shame. I actually really like that feature. Consequences for failures. In Kids on Bikes, success and failure are not binary. Although earning an adversity, I keep wanting to say adversary. Adversity token is based on rolling above or below your target. What happens after is a little more complicated. The good that results from a success and the bad that occurs from a failure depend on how far the rolled number is from the target number. Tremendous successes bring unexpected benefits. Staggering failures bring unanticipated consequences. No matter what happens, the result of a roll should push the story forward. When you succeed at a check, the story should move in a direction that both the characters and the players want it to. So here we go. So if you get a +10 or higher on your roll, the character succeeds smoothly and easily. +5 to a +9, the character succeeds quite impressively. +1 to a +4, the character succeeds, but not impressively. You're like, oh, good job. 0, so you just meet the difficulty level. The character succeeds, but just barely. -4 to -1, the character fails, but not too badly. -9 to -5, the failure is bad, but not a disaster. -14 to -10, the failure is profound. -15 or lower, the failure is staggering and catastrophic. I feel like, man, that's like tough because like I feel like if I were in a situation where the GM was like, yeah, it's gonna be a difficulty of 20, and you have like let's say you have a D12 to roll, you could risk it and choose to roll your D12 and hope that you get a lucky break and you get a 12 and then like an 8 to make that DC. But that's like very much like if I get a 2, that's going to be a catastrophic event that happens because of that failure. I get an adversity token, but it also could mean like something really, really fucking bad happening. Facing your fears. As established during character creation, each of you has a fear that will both guide your role-playing and have some mechanical implications. Specifically, when facing your fear, you must make snap decisions. You cannot spend adversity tokens to help your friends, though they can spend adversity tokens to help you. Depending on the severity of the fear, you may have to make checks at up to a -3 penalty. To start facing your fear means that you are in a situation where the thing you fear is present. So that could mean like if you're afraid of snakes, there are snakes present. This is very applicable to me as a person. Real life myriad hates snakes. The first implication of facing your fear is that you must make all of your checks as snap decisions, even if you have a relevant knack. So it just completely forgoes any sort of benefit that you would get from a knack or anything like that. You just automatically have to make a snap decision. The second implication is that you cannot use adversity tokens to help out your friends. You're too focused on getting yourself out of the situation that's scaring you to think about them right now. Fuck your friends, essentially. Finally, depending on the severity of the exposure to your fear, you may suffer a penalty of up to -3 on all checks made while exposed to your fear. The best severity of the penalty will be up to The severity of the penalty will be up to the GM, but here are a few suggestions. Don't apply penalties for non-persistent instances of the thing you're afraid of. For example, seeing a snake slither across your path doesn't mean that all checks made for the rest of the session will have to be a penalty. Brief instance of witnessing your fear might only apply to 1 or 2 checks. A -1 penalty is good for when the fear is persistent, but at least rationally irrelevant. If you're trying to hack into a computer next to a sealed terrarium with a big snake in it, you might not perform quite at your best. A -2 penalty is good for when that fear is persistent and possibly relevant. For example, if the snake is loose in the office while you're trying to hack the computer, you're going to be pretty preoccupied with that. That's actually a nightmare for me. I've had nightmares about that, actually. A -3 penalty is good for when the fear is persistent and overwhelming. For example, if multiple snakes are loose in the room while you're trying to hack the computer and they're slithering all over you, you're going to be focused on little else than getting away from them and certainly not thinking clearly. With the GM's permission, players may spend adversity tokens to ignore their fear, which they must do prior to rolling any checks. So if you want to ignore your fear, you may spend an adversity token, but it has to be with the permission of the GM. Although there is a strength that lets you do it without the permission of the GM. Doing harm. In narratives, when one character actively tries to harm another character, things have gotten bad. They've progressed or regressed to a point where a calm, reasoned option is no longer possible. Simply put, any effort to do harm alters the course of any narrative. Because of that, you need to approach harm, whether physical or emotional, with care in Kids on Bikes. Physical and emotional violence where the actor wants to do bodily or mental harm to their target must be handled with care in games. This goes beyond the kind of playful shoving and teasing that friends may do with each other and into times when the intent is to hurt. When you decide, though, that you want to harm another character, you're altering the narrative of the game regardless of whether you're successful or not. When thinking about attempting to cause harm in the game, there are 3 things to confirm before entertaining it for a character. During Session 0, players also indicated their willingness or unwillingness to have harm occur in the game, even when they're not involved. So that's something to consider if you want to do harm to another character or even like an NPC, but you guys kind of were like, yeah, we're not gonna have any violence in this game, then no can do. Not allowed, unless we revisit it at the table and everyone decides that, yeah, that's cool. Also, during Session 0, players would have indicated whether they're willing to have their character attempt to cause harm in the game and the kinds of harm that they're willing to participate in. If the player isn't willing to have their character involved, then the narrative needs to take a different direction. In Kids on Bikes, the assumption is that any violence, even if it's not intended to cause harm, can only take place between characters in the same age bracket, or within 2 years or fewer between their ages. If everyone at your table would all like to go against this assumption, make sure that it's something everyone at the table has agreed to. Whether violence meant to cause harm is between 2 player characters or a PC and an NPC, the GM will make sure that the stakes for the combat are clear by going through the following processes. First, the player controlling the instigating character explains the kind of harm they plan to do, including which stat they plan to use. If the violence is instigated by a player, the GM will tell the players that what will inescapably happen to the group if they go through with it, then check pressure to confirm that all players at the table are comfortable with the attempted harm and the risk. So you basically will say, hey, if you decide to attack this NPC, he will call all of his friends, the other security guards, and everyone in this agency is going to be alerted to your presence. Which is nice for everyone to know, hey, this has serious implications. Don't just go doing things willy-nilly. Don't be murder hobos. The GM will ask the player controlling the character attempting the harm, what are you personally risking and what are you hoping to gain? The GM will then ask the player controlling the character being targeted, what are you risking and what are you hoping to gain? The player should also indicate that the stat they're planning to use to respond or try to avoid harm. Once the stakes and the stats are clear, players roll to determine who controls the outcome, then the winning character's player and the GM narrate the consequences. Money. Since your game is likely going to take place in a town with a functioning monetary economy, you might want to buy some things to help you in your efforts. It should be assumed that you have access to money. However, the degree of access you have depends on your age and in-game socioeconomic status. Children cannot have jobs. That's all you need to know about that. Oh, actually, let's just go back into money. Children cannot have jobs. Teens have a limited access to money, and adults have much more access to money than teens can, within reason, buy what they need to buy. So you're basically, as a child, you're limited to like what access you would have unless you give a reason, like my parents are rich and they gave me their credit card. type of thing. Teens, probably the same thing. You have a little bit more, especially if you're able to work like a little shitty like summer job. Whereas being an adult, you have adult money. You can go eat cake for dinner. And that brings us to chapter 5, where I think we're gonna end it. We got a decent way through. Keep in mind that. Keep in mind that. I think. Yeah. All of this is the appendixes as well as the little adventure. So we really only have this much to get through next time. Yeah, that was quite nice. We're gonna leave it there. Thanks for hanging out with me today, guys. I feel like I've learned a lot. I feel like I can probably fake my way through a Kids on Bikes game at this point. Probably. Like I did before. I can kind of work my way through it. What do we got coming up the rest of the week? Tomorrow we'll be over on Folk and Myth for Vampire Arc 3 premiere. This is going to be the final arc of Lights, our Vampire the Masquerade campaign that we've been running since the beginning of the year. And then on Saturday at 11 a.m. Pacific, we'll be back on this channel for the also final arc, the final volume premiere of All We've Lost, which is very exciting. I'm only a little nervous. Now I'm like, oh, my book is all bent. Did that? Who bent my book? But yeah. Thank you guys for hanging out. I think we're gonna go right into Creep. We're gonna give a little bit of love because Creep is doing some art stuff. So stick around for the raid. And then, yeah, I don't think I have anything else this week. You guys can see my wrist. Oh my god. You don't know her. Don't look at my wrist. Anyway. I guess bye. See you guys tomorrow or something. Whatever.